Good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. Welcome to all of you in person. It's always very nice to have an in-person event, so I welcome you all and thank you for taking the time to come to the Barrico Foundation this evening and be with us. And thank you as well to those of you online joining us for this hybrid event. My name is Janelle Galvanic. I'm the head of the Regional Peace Support Department here at the Barrico Foundation, and we have a very insightful panel discussion prepared for you tonight. I want to thank our four speakers who I will introduce very soon. We have two online and two here in person, so bear with us during this hybrid event. I do expect that all of the technology will work out quite well. So obviously the topic of our event tonight is social confidence building measures, social dialogue between Azerbaijan and Armenia. The decades-long conflict between these two countries has deeply impacted societies. While there has been many efforts by actors and organizations over the years to facilitate dialogue and build peace, these efforts have struggled to address the deeply rooted mistrust between the populations of both countries. Yet, building confidence and enabling dialogue between Armenians and Azerbaijanis is essential to rebuild trust, foster reconciliation, and enable peaceful relations among the countries in the South Caucasus. Comprehensive confidence-building measures and deeper societal engagement is urgently needed. Currently, there are not a lot of opportunities to discuss these type of issues. In the time of COP29, ongoing negotiations between the two countries and the dramatic geopolitical shifts in the region, many people may ask, what is there even to discuss? So we want to create this space tonight. We want to give a space to Azerbaijani and Armenian experts to speak about the myriad of challenges to this type of track 2, track 3 work in the region and the changes that are necessary to allow communication and dialogue across societies. We will also explore new ideas for how confidence-building efforts and social dialogues can bridge divides, cultivate a shared understanding, and support the region's transition from a state of conflict to one of peaceful coexistence. So again, I welcome all of you tonight, and I welcome our four panelists. And I would like to briefly introduce everybody before we get going tonight. First of all, Dr. Laila Aliyeva is an associate of the Oxford School of Global and Area Studies and was previously a senior Common Room member and academic visitor at St. Antony's College, Oxford University. She founded and directed 2 think tanks in Baku and held fellowships at Harvard University, University of California, Berkeley, Kennan Institute in Washington, D.C., the NATO Defense College in Rome, and the IFK in Vienna. Her research covers Azerbaijan, the Caucasus, Russia, the broader former Soviet Union, and ranges thematically from energy security to democracy in the oil-rich states to integration into the EU and NATO. Laila, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Dr. Philip Gaman-Geylan, apologies, I have trouble pronouncing your last name. He's an associate professor at the Joan B. Kroc School of Peace Studies at the University of San Diego, where he is joining us today, where he teaches courses in conflict analysis and resolution, mediation, media, and nationalism and conflict. He is the author of the book Conflict Resolution Beyond the International Relations Paradigm, Evolving Designs as a Transformative Practice in Nagorno-Karabakh and Syria. He is co-founder and board member of the Imagine Center for Conflict Transformation and is an editor at the Caucasus Edition Journal of Conflict Transformation. His research is focused on politics of memory and conflict contexts, as well as on critical reevaluation and design of conflict resolution interventions. Philip, thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you.
Shujat Ahmadzadeh is an independent researcher focused on the South Caucasus, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia. He has extensive experience in conflict transformation as well as in policy advocacy, project management, and lecturing, among other professional roles. He collaborates with various media outlets and think tanks, including the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Shujat, thank you for joining us. And Dr. Mikhail Zolyan is a political analyst and historian from Yerevan. He is a former member of the National Assembly of the Republic of Armenia from the My Step faction and served for 2 years as a member of the Standing Committee on Foreign Relations and as a member of the Standing Committee on European Integration. He teaches at the UNESCO Chair of Democracy at Yerevan State Linguistic University. He specializes in issues of national identity, ethnic conflict, nationalism and ethnicity, as well as democratization and democracy in the post-Soviet context, and his articles are frequently published in Armenian and international media. Thank you, Miguel.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a very prestigious panel, and I'm really excited to get started tonight. I've been able to speak with everybody in advance of this event, and I do have to say I've learned so much from these four individuals, so I'm looking forward to the discussion today. We'll get right started. I think I want to start with you, Laila. When we talk about intersocietal dialogues, why are they important? Why are they important in transforming perceptions and relations, particularly here between Armenians and Azerbaijanis?
Yeah, thank you so much. First of all, thank you for inviting, and thank you for giving me such an interesting questions. 35 years has lasted this conflict. I mean, it's quite a long period. And very often people compare, you know, the conflict resolution track to diplomacy in the early years of the conflict with what's happening now. Some consider it's challenging, more challenging even than it was before. But we will come to that later when I see why this very same processes might be viewed by some as challenges and by the others as assets or advantage. First of all, I would say that, of course, the experience of common coexistence, mixed marriages, and other things which were happening in the Soviet times, that was an asset, of course, on which our conflict resolution people and track to diplomacy activists, they worked on. However, in these 35 years, while the conflict was called frozen, I mean, the processes were taking place within these societies. And I think it's very important. So because the leaders have their political agendas, it's much easier to stir or preserve this status quo if the societies are not communicating to each other, if they're not in a permanent sort of way of contact. And in these 35 years, I think two very important things were taking place. First of all, regionalization of the conflict. And the second, actually, the growing sense of interdependency. And I consider both as assets for the new stage of confidence building measures and others, because I think I see it as a growing maturity of the societies. My also experience in conflict or track to diplomacy right after the war in 2020 proved that there is a very serious need in the societies on both sides in seeing the alternative culture of living next door to each other. It's the culture of cooperation. And it's not just about tolerance. It's not just about, you know, debate or discussion. It's about the awareness that we have common problems which we cannot resolve on our own. We need to cooperate to address this culture, to address these challenges. And the number of the views of these videos, which were, I think, 200,000 every time, just proves that there is a significant need in this alternative culture of cooperation and orientation to the idea of the commonality of the challenges we face. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Obviously, this sounds very ideal, you know, a culture of cooperation, understanding that we have common problems, but I think everybody would say easier said than done. There are a lot of challenges to this ideal situation. So I'd like to go through, outline some of these challenges and turn first to Dr. Philip. if I may, just call you by your first name. What are the various challenges? Maybe you could spell some of these out for us with regard to people peace building and dialogue engagement between these two communities.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me, and just Philip will be enough. I also want to apologize to everybody. I will have to leave in about 45 minutes. I have to teach a class, so I might not stay for the Q&A session, so apologies in advance. So turning to your question about the challenges, there are some obvious challenges, right? So we have autocratization in Azerbaijan and quite a serious crackdown on civil society, and more even directly targeting people who not even cooperate with Armenians recently, which has not been the case before. You have a serious disillusionment in peace building on the Armenian side. So these ones we maybe discussed a lot and have been discussed, so I don't even want to go too deep there. I almost want to focus on the flip side of this, that despite all that, there is a lot happening. I think there is somewhat of a misperception that there is not a lot happening. Just Juliet and me were co-teaching just a week ago, and I'm in just next 3 months, I say, I have 5, 6, 7 engagements, and I know I'm not even participating in 5% of what's happening in practically in a wide range of fields. So I don't think the work isn't happening. I think it's there, and it's there where the need is there. And I'll talk about it a bit later. But I think why we are not seeing it necessarily, because the focus shifted on what's needed shifted. And there is quite a bit of inertia, probably potentially on the donors end, trying to really kind of do the type of peace building we used to do in 90s and 2000s, when the threats were very different, where the two sides were really posing an existential threat to each other. But also the needs were different. There was a need for some kind of coexistence, probably in and around Karabakh at least. And that is also removed quite violently through complete ethnic cleansing. But the peace that's coming today, it's not the peace of 1990s, it's not through liberal democratization and minority rights and coexistence, but it's effectively a peace through a wall in between the two sides, complete ethnic cleansing, and some kind of realpolitik deal to somehow coexist in the same region. So that changes also the need for what type of work we are looking into. And here I'll turn the attention to the need to maybe refocus from inter-societal work between the two countries. Is necessary, but somewhat secondary. Perhaps it needs to be done along the lines of what Leila was mentioning in terms of kind of healing and what used to be called transitional justice, but maybe in some new format. Some form of reparations for those who lost property and family members. But also we need to focus on really changing the basis of national identity, I would say, within the two countries, because it has been heavily focused on enmity with each other and mutual existential threat, while the existential threats today are coming from more outside and towards the region in general, and not necessarily towards each of them, and really keeping this mutual enmity as the foundation of each identity is quite problematic. Then enmity itself drives potential future violence without necessarily much of a structural basis for it. So from that perspective, I'd say focusing heavily on education and rethinking what is being Armenian, what is being Azerbaijani, how are we dealing with conflicts internally and externally, along with healing that also Leila mentioned, I think are becoming important. And that's not necessarily where we are focusing our efforts.
Thank you very much. Now I'll come back a bit to that you're already getting into some ideas for how to take this forward. And I think that's one of the main things we want to get out of this event. But to stick with the challenges for another panelist, what do you see the main challenges, Mikhail, for this type of interaction?
So thank you for this opportunity, and thank you for coming on such a day. Maybe there are some other items on the agenda, on the news agenda, which attract our attention. But let me start with the good news. The new president-elect of the United States has promised that he will end all wars. So probably we don't really have to do this anymore. Maybe someone who's going to take care of that. But but on a more serious note, I think Philip started to talk about very important issues that now we are in a situation which is quite different from the previous decade. So some of the challenges that used to be there for the previous decades, they didn't disappear, they didn't go anywhere. And of course, when we are able to deal with the deep reconciliation between the societies, all these issues will come up. Dealing with the past or transitional justice, healing the trauma, all these are very deep issues which are very important, and until we work on these issues, there will never be a full reconciliation. But at this point, I have the feeling that the issue is to have something which in some conflict resolution frameworks, they call it the narrow peace. So basically to have a situation when there is no war, when there is a border and not a front line. And the picture that was on the before we started the conversation, there was a picture which showed an Armenian road sign, which on the one side it showed to the name of an Armenian city, on another side it showed border with Azerbaijan. So of course, for people in European Union, this is very normal, but for Armenia and Azerbaijan, even this is a little step forward. So at this point, this is it's a tangible result. So all the efforts are focused on this, and the challenges are different in different countries. I think I will talk about Armenia more, and my colleagues and friends from Azerbaijan will talk about Azerbaijan. In Armenia, you have a very interesting situation in which, well, first of all, society is tired of the conflict. Society is tired of the war. People don't want to have this anymore. Especially after the 2020 war, and even though there is still there's a lot of trauma, there is a feeling that huge injustice has happened to Armenians, especially the Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh, but there is also a genuine desire to avoid war. And even the opposition that is very active today and promoting a kind of anti-conflict resolution agenda, they're not talking about the desire to somehow have a revanche. They're saying that Azerbaijan and Turkey won't stop. They're not saying that, we want a new war. They're saying that the other side wants war, so we have to prepare. So even these people, they share this idea that we need peace. And I think this is a moment when some decisions can be taken, some compromise can happen. And it's a quite complicated situation in which the top government is promoting the peace agenda. Of course, we can discuss why they're doing it. Are they sincere in this or not? Did they promote before 2020 or did they change it? But at least the fact is that they're promoting this agenda. And then there's this community of peace builders who have been involved in these contacts and meetings, who are also trying to promote this agenda, but they're a small group, maybe a few dozen people. It's a bubble. And then you have the larger society, which also wants peace, but it doesn't have the voice to talk about it. It doesn't have the discourse. It doesn't have the narrative. And there are also people, institutions, structures who are still maintaining these old narratives of conflict, whether it's state institutions, whether it's educational institutions, whether it's certain intellectuals, because for them it is part of their identity and they are reproducing these narratives of conflicts. I'm sure there are analogies to that also in Azerbaijan. And finally, there are outside forces who are using these narratives of conflict to manipulate the situation. And I agree with Philip that the majority, the biggest threats now, they're not Armenians and Azerbaijanis for each other. There are bigger forces which are trying to manipulate us, and they're trying to use us and Azerbaijanis for their aims. And there is some understanding in the societies that this is the situation, but still there's a lot of work to be done.
Thank you for that. I'll actually come back to the last point you made, because I think that's a bigger topic that we want to unpack a little bit. But as you pointed out, the situation is fundamentally different now than it was a few years ago. So the situation has changed, and like Philip said, there are things happening. They're not necessarily visible, but they are happening. And I think one of the objectives we have tonight is to make these things a bit more visible. But the situation has changed. So turning to you, Shudat, what changes do we need to make in this field? People working on dialogue, people working on confidence building measures. What's necessary? What change is necessary to make these initiatives more impactful or more successful?
Answering that, I would, thank you for the question. So answering that, I would be a bit, comparative and also give the bit background information with the goal of kind of contemplating what Phil, Leila, and Mikhail have already said. So there are two meta changes that happen in the Armenian Azerbaijani peacemaking process. The first is there is no more shared vision of peace across the divide. After the first war ended, just for the audience, in 1994, both Armenia and Azerbaijan went through a very violent cycle of ethnic cleansing, forced expulsions of the minority of the other. After the first war ended, there was a multinational efforts by OSCE to reverse this cycle by promoting what could be deemed as the neoliberal peace agenda, in which parties, meaning Armenia and Azerbaijan, would commit to peace, come up with the terms, and enjoy the benefits of peacemaking in a regional context, which would allow them to have a microspace eventually in Karabakh, so they could be Armenians and Azerbaijanis living under the one roof, under the one state, and basically reversing the war results and rebuilding the that was a vision that shared multilaterally in the negotiation, though these negotiations have long been criticized for being conducted just for the formality. There is a good kind of skepticism, criticism on this end as well, but that was a vision. Up until 2023, when this cycle got kind of quote unquote completed to a degree that today in Armenia, there are no the minority of the other. In Azerbaijan, there is no minority of the other. So there are no Armenians in Azerbaijan, there are no Azerbaijanis in Armenia. So conflict got quote unquote resolved in a quite illiberal way in contrast to how it was envisioned, how its resolution was envisioned. So now it created a crisis. So for the long 3 decades, Armenian and Azerbaijani practitioners, peace builders, civil society activists, experts, even the others worked to get this goal done, realized. So that is, we have a neoliberal vision of the peace. We have Armenia and Azerbaijan as two societies reconciling, and we also have internal reconciliation between Azerbaijan and Karabakhi Armenians. Now, all these understandings are not irrelevant because the realities on the ground have changed, especially in 2023. And the crisis is, what is the new vision? How it should look like? If this vision should follow the pattern of the previous vision, it should reverse what results? So should it be like Armenia and Azerbaijan reconciling as two national states within their homogenized territorial boundaries, or they should work for revising a degree of kind of this the population exchange, if violent population exchange. So that is the first set of questions which are lingering in the air. The second is, up until 2020 or 2023, what you call bottom-up or track 1.5, track 2, or track 3 peace building initiatives were happening in the space where there was a peace process officially. So there was a peace process under the umbrella of OSCE Minsk Group. Again, very good share of criticism on this end, why it was a failure, but still there was a process happening, and both parties, at least formally and legally, committed to that process. The key difference of the new era, if we could call it that way, is that there is no peace process per se in the terms that it was there up until 2020. So there are episodes of negotiations happening between Armenia and Azerbaijan, especially after 2023 bilaterally without mediators. But these negotiations are hardly making up as a process. So there is episodical good news, good deadlines emerging that the deal is about to be signed. And there's also a period of Armenia and Azerbaijan not talking to each other. So there is no process. So Armenian and Azerbaijani kind of peace building is happening within under these two meta crises, along with the other crises related to the liberal peace building and so on and so forth, of how to envision the post-liberal peace and so on and so forth. Within that, I would pretty much second what has already been told by my good friends and the colleagues, is that I think there needs to be refocusing on intra-level peace building in a way that it also builds up a space for possible interstate peace building, intercommunal or interstate peace building, which means that there is a need for engaging more within Armenia and within Azerbaijan in a way that it would be laying a foundation for possible interstate normalization to come, which should include even though it may sound as a buzzword because it is always told and it is always kind of pushed forward, it should involve a lot of efforts in a transitional justice, which encompass a wide range of activities, from education, from history textbooks, to reimagining, reimagining new identities, also to addressing the quote unquote, what they call the dark past or the crimes committed in the past by the country that we're talking about, which should build upon a space in which Armenian Azerbaijani rivalry would not be seen as sort of a existential threat by country X. So this is the one thing. Along with that, there should be also needs for envisioning how to make local peace building in areas where it is possible. And today, and also quite recently, we had talks on how to make borderization of Armenia and Azerbaijan. You rightly mentioned that the border is a new thing for Armenia and Azerbaijan. Armenia and Azerbaijan never had borders, physical ones, and now they are being reconstructed, literally speaking, physically also. How to make the border desecretize in a way that it is not only physical offense, but also something that could bring local examples of a peace building in which communities could, on the both sides, could engage with each other.
Thank you very much. So we first of all need a new vision, because the vision that was in place for many years beforehand is now not relevant. And we also need the societies to enter into dialogue with themselves in order to deal with their own past. These are, again here, easier said than done, but I'd like to turn over to Leila as well. What else do you think needs to be changed about the way that these initiatives are being led? You're on.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much. Well, first of all, I think that showing the benefits of peaceful and cooperative coexistence with neighbors is important, because there was some inertia of 30-year-old non-cooperation patterns when countries were doing all right, let's say so. But we need to show that if they cooperate, there will be an added value. So changing the perspective is extremely important. The other thing is, as I already mentioned, is greater openness to public, not avoiding publicity, but rather going into public with the ideas, because there is much more peace potential in the society that very often experts might think. So, and the attractiveness of the culture which they're offering might be much greater than they think. Then the other thing is that should be change of perspective on the others, because we need, I think, to move from the concept of tolerance to the one to appreciation. I think when we raise the standards, we might also receive some different dynamic in the society and changes in the perspective of the others, because there are so many things that the other can do better than ourselves. And these should be brought by the leaders in the society. Unfortunately, societal leaders were non-governmental organizations, and society was rather a subordinate trends in our societies, regardless of the state of openness of the political regime. I think the official leaders were moving forward the process at this stage. But I think we need to take the initiative in our hands, and we should lead the process rather than following the process of the elites, meaning political and ruling elites. And the other issue I would like to stress is that unless both nations perceive equality of all, regardless of their identity, ethnic and religious background, in regards basic rights, there won't be any serious change. I think this sort of liberalization, and that comes together with modernization, because modernization of minds, which I think was clearly demonstrated in the events late in the Caucasus in general, they showed that the processes of urbanization, they decrease the number of the agricultural population for whom the issue of the size of the territory, the physical borders are extremely important. So I think these processes and intergenerational change, the younger generation, they perceive better the changed nature of power, which is becoming more and more virtual. That means the borders also become more provisional. So I think at this stage, when there is a demarcation of physical borders, will be quite temporary, or let's say it's a first stage, initial stage, for the next one, which will be overcoming these borders. And I would say it is not so tightly related to the contemporary period, because there were proposals, for instance, in Azerbaijan in the 90s, when the leaders, even political leaders, would say that if two countries cannot agree on the borders, why don't they create some common union or common state even in order to make the border more provisional? So there were sort of solutions, also creative solutions, out-of-box solutions before that. And I believe that with the new generation, with the urbanization, with greater sort of spread of IT and other things, I think there will be also the less tension in terms of perception of the physical borders. So let me stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to stick with this this topic of the youth. Actually, it's something that we haven't heard yet. And for you, Philip, you're working, you're a co-founder of the organization, the Imagine Center. And from my understanding, you do a lot of work with youth. And I would like to hear more about what the needs of the youth are. I mean, this conflict has dramatically changed in the last few years, and the needs of the youth, as Laila just pointed out, or the perceptions, are quite different than the older generation. So I'm wondering if you could shed some light on that, and then I'll come also to Shujat on that topic as well.
I've been working with youth for about 17, 18 years now, and I think in line with a lot of things we heard already, the needs have changed quite a lot. Again, in the 2000s, early 2010s, we were overall looking into democratization and peace through democratization. Overall, also there was an agreement that Shujat mentioned on what the peace will look like. So there was a debate about the specifics of how exactly the self-rule of Karabakh will look like. But overall, the self-rule and autonomy or independence wasn't necessarily questioned in this de facto version of self-rule. And that would also assume some kind of coexistence, right, and potential living under the rule of each other, of Armenians under Azerbaijani rule and vice versa. So at this time, the focus was on this peaceful coexistence, how to think about, right, so checking with other regions, such as Northern Ireland, where people coexist in the same space, overall in somewhat democratic spaces. So that sounds great in the past, but not necessarily all that relevant anymore. including for youth work. Again, not only we don't have a common vision, I don't see even the need for a common vision at this stage, to be honest, but also the conflict is solved through ethnic cleansing and effectively borderization. So that's a given already for next 20, 30 years, maybe in a very distant future, we can talk about coexistence, but that's not necessarily what we are looking into in foreseeable future. With that in mind, then what's the need for either youth work or overall civil society work, I believe, is changing. I don't see much of a space for conflict resolution as such, as in solving the conflict in any permanent sense, because again, the premise on which that was based, essentially liberal peace, what we call currently, right? So it's just peace through democratization is not necessarily possible. And with that in mind, then we are looking into, to use a bit technical terms, conflict management, conflict transformation. On the conflict management end, we need to prevent further violence. And a lot of the drivers of violence are not present necessarily, right? So that, again, because of past violence, because of ethnic cleansing, currently none of the countries seem to have territorial ambitions over the other territories. So that removes a lot of structural needs for violence. So the enmity itself then becomes key. And here, again, I see like differentiation between more expert level work, trying to make the case for essentially why, so non-violence cooperation can play out to the benefit of both countries, very realistic in the way approach. Because turning this into further, even more extensive competition between Russia and France and the US and Iran and so on, China and India, might turn us into something like Syria, which is, yes, Armenia might suffer more, but overall, nobody in the region necessarily going to benefit from becoming an area of competition. So that's one. So in this case, young people are not, but those who are kind of coming with a very expert approach. So track 1.5 type of work is necessary. I see more than the dialogues of the past for youth. But on the flip end, I think in terms of conflict transformation, this longer term coexistence, there is a serious need to work with people because, and again, going back to education, I'll give one example of recently I was running a summer school, well, in summer, I guess, and in the region, won't go into more details, but I asked this, I thought it was a ice-breaking question, as in if you had a chance to have dinner with somebody, like historical figure or real life person, who would that be? And I was shocked by the amount of Hitlers and Goebbelses that showed up. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting local nationalist figures, perhaps, but not Hitlers and Goebbelses, and not one or two, many of them. Essentially, on that level, so it is young people are trained to imagine the future through quite an extreme violence, and the assumption is we are not doing violence well enough, so we are not doing propaganda well enough. So I think that's a serious problem for both internally, the way we imagine what Hitler's and Goebbels' Germany was for Germany's sake, right? But also what it means in terms of relations with the others. So I think this is where I see very serious work that needs to be done moving forward. And that's not going to be done through dialogue. I think dialogues are important, but very minor at this point, in my view, but more in terms of restructuring the education and overall the way the politics are discussed in the societies.
Thank you very much for that. Shusha, do you have anything to add on the youth angles?
Yeah, I think I'll pretty much agree with what Phil said. To continue, the other kind of practical recommendation that I may have would be perhaps I think to make conflict transformation more robust in Armenia and Azerbaijan, one could also think of cross-conflict exposure, even though that may sound sort of a kind of looking for copy-paste, quote-unquote, resolutions elsewhere. But I believe, for example, there is a meaning and there is a value of enhancing Armenian Azerbaijani even separately, but again, this Armenian Azerbaijani conflict transformation that would also include, let's say, Turkey at one point, which would create a cross-conflict exposure. Though Armenian Turkey dispute over the genocide is the one thing, and Armenian Azerbaijani conflict is a different thing, though also at some point there is some historical, overlapping for sure. But learning from these two, kind of making these two conflict cases in a way that cross-conflict exposure could help the conflict Azerbaijan, I think is something that could be kind of examined more and could be something that could be practically implemented, which could also include the other areas such as the Western Balkans, which shares the same structural background that the South Caucasus has, but that's a bit far away. So the Turkey could be one example in which Armenian, Azerbaijani, Turkish conflict transformation could happen in one enhanced space, not necessarily interlinked, as in you varying Turks, Armenians, Azerbaijanis, but rather more of like understanding the context, and by understanding, building up the space inside of Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Turkey that would create communal narratives that would also help in a wider space, in a wider picture, Armenian, Azerbaijan reconciliation. And the second could be more educational kind of efforts, institutionalized ways, of course, desired at this point, to have critical, knowledge production in Armenia and Azerbaijan that would help our young Azerbaijanis and young Armenians to critically re-examine their, identity issues, history, the conflict, and other areas that intersect with all these things. So I personally see a value of investing in cross-conflict exposure. I don't know if there exists such a concept of cross-conflict exposure, whatever, you got the idea. The second is investing more in critical education and knowledge production in local languages that would help Armenians and Azerbaijanis, perhaps separately at this point, and hopefully, not hopefully together as in you bring Armenians and Azerbaijan, but rather in a way that it helps both of them, in a way that it also helps wider structural problems, such as the ones emerging from the colonial past, the one emerging from the nation state and nationalism spaces, and so on and so forth. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Your mention of the cross-conflict exposure brings me back to what Mikhail was saying before about the influence of other actors. Armenia and Azerbaijan do not exist in a vacuum. So there are obviously much, very powerful influences on these countries and on the way they interact with each other. So I would like to hear from you more about how this is affecting.
Oh, unfortunately, probably the conflict in our region is one of the most complicated ones in terms of geopolitical involvement. Russia, Turkey, Iran, EU, US, China, India, Pakistan, Israel. This is just the main, there are some others too. So, and of course, when you have so many different interests, but also these interests, it's not a priority for any of them, maybe except for Turkey at a certain point, or Russia at a certain point, but for all of them, this is secondary or even less important issue, but still they have their vision, they have their interests. So in the end, you have a situation in which none of these external powers wants or is able to kind of accept responsibility on itself and solve it in any way, but also it won't let others do it. So you have this situation that is dragging on, but even that's not the biggest problem. I would say the biggest problem is our own, and by us I mean Armenians and Azerbaijanis, our own mindset, which basically which is based on the idea that we are not strong enough, that we are too weak, we are too small, we cannot really solve anything. So the only chance we have is to find some strong ally or kind of outsource the resolution of this conflict to some outside force, and then try to make sure that the resolution suits our interests, instead of just talking to each other and trying to find a solution which would be a compromise, or at least understanding each other's point of view from the beginning. It has begun to change, and I would say that unfortunately it took several wars. And still there's this mentality that we are too small, and it's also connected to this very common post-Soviet conspirological thinking, which I think it's some kind of a pandemic in former Soviet countries, which has now spread to other parts of the world. And yesterday's election result maybe also shows that it's already a global pandemic. But in our countries, it's very strong. And it's very hard to trust, even within the societies. Armenian, I'm sure it's the same in Azerbaijan. People don't trust each other. People don't trust the government, which is a good thing, if you ask me. We trust the government, but there's a limit to that as well. People don't trust NGOs. They don't trust media. They don't trust anybody. Like, they see conspiracies everywhere. And in this situation, when you see conspiracies everywhere, you think that we cannot really, Armenians and Azerbaijanis, there's no way we can work out these issues. It will still be decided by the Russians, by the Turks, by the Americans, etc. And this mentality is it's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you don't believe that you are able to find the resolution and you go to somebody else, then somebody else will advance their own agenda. I feel like, at least on the level of the government negotiations, Armenia and Azerbaijan have been able to break this cycle, but how sustainable it is, we don't know. Because, for example, if you look at Russia, recently, Foreign Minister Lavrov again said, basically his statement was that it's too early for Armenia and Azerbaijan to conclude a peace agreement, because there are still issues that have to be addressed. So in the interest of a more sustainable peace, we have to work more slowly. So I think that's, that speaks for itself, like how difficult it is. And of course, there are forces inside Armenia and Azerbaijan who are very much resonating with this kind of agenda, and it's a problem.
I see. So before confidence building measures between societies can be carried out, the societies themselves need to have their confidence built. So we are running out of time, and I do know that our professor in San Diego needs to run off to teach a class, I believe, on the election results from today. So we don't want to keep him from a very, probably a quite depressing lecture. But before you go, before you head off, we were talking on Monday about the need for a shift in what peace building means in Armenia and Azerbaijan. I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that. I think it was also Shujat was talking about, to reimagine peace building. And so I'm thinking that this might be the sort of same kind of concept. So I'm just wondering if you can enlighten us on that, Dr. Philip.
Yeah, thanks for the chance. In a way, I think I covered some of these points already, assuming I'm going to jump off soon. But I fully second everything that Mikhail said, that for a long time we were relying on the Minsk group outside mediators on in terms of the formal peace process to somehow come up with a formula that we will like, right? And we really gave up on many chances when the international community, to a degree, Russia and US, say, between 2008 and 2011, for example, during Obama's and Medvedev's presidencies, really tried. And we're on the same page. Comparably, we still refuse to effectively compromise with each other. So we lost all the chances for agency then on official level. But similarly, on a track 2 level, we were a lot of times dependent on waiting European partners, others, to come in and just tell us how to do peace better. Which again, maybe made sense in the 90s when the European integration, in 2000s, European integration processes seemed somewhat realistic. If we were to go the the Baltic states route potentially, right, and integrate with the European Union, then maybe that could have worked. But this is not where we are anymore. So in that sense, I do see the bilateral negotiations, fully seconding what Mikhail said, as a very big breakthrough in that sense. Sustainability and institutionalization of them is to be seen, of course. But in that sense, obviously, a peace agreement, even if it's very rudimentary, is key, because it can help establish diplomatic relations through which then further, it's institutionalization then of continuous relationship through which all the future issues could be, or non-resolved issues could be solved, such as borderization or roads, connectivity, and or what else. So that's on a track 1 level. But I'm seeing similar move on track 2 and a bit perhaps less on track 3 level, that there is much less acceptance or even imposition by foreign colleagues and friends of what peace building should look like, partially because the vision is lost from outside or is not accepted, right? But also because it's dangerous to a degree. Again, people have been imprisoned and what else because of work. But as a result, we have, and also disillusionment in Armenia, and some civil society just left peace building. I don't think it was a bad thing necessarily, though, because now we have much more genuine and kind of meaningful efforts emerging, including on a track 2 level, where actually the leadership comes from Armenians and Azerbaijanis directly. And then if we invite foreign partners join in, either as funders or as experts in a particular space, let's say of borderization or transitional justice, the need is very local and the initiative is local. So I think that supporting that shift is necessary, as in trying to see where is the need and where is the request from the local actors, including many sitting right now around the room. It's really important. And similarly, again, that comes to the third level, meaning more local level, fully local, that we were discussing. Again, educational is extremely important. We mentioned a number of times again, both in terms of national identity and how we imagine national identity, kind of away from extreme violence essentially, but towards other versions of considering rebuilding solidarity locally, but also about how to deal with conflict, because also talk about culture of violence. It is in also everyday versions of how to deal with each other. Yeah, so if we have a conflict in the street, do you solve it through violence or other means? And we tend to go towards violence again, perhaps living in a relatively violent, historically, region. So that education becomes extremely important, and also support for groups that are trying to integrate refugees, those who suffered war trauma. So again, a lot of work is already happening very organically. So just really noticing it and starting to support that, what's organically emerging, bilaterally or locally, is extremely important. And there's not necessarily Yemen the funding streams tends to go. They still tend to go towards kind of bigger external organization trying to bring kind of some kind of external version of the peace, and that's just simply not going to be accepted anymore. Thank you.
Thank you very much for joining us. And we will allow you to leave now because we know you're heading off. So thank you very, very much for joining us and taking the time, and best of luck with your lecture tonight. I would like to open up the session now for questions and comments, or ideally questions from the audience. And for those of you who are online, you can use the question and answer feature. Please understand that we're probably not going to be able to answer all of the questions that are being asked, but we will try to answer as many as we can. So please use the question and answer feature, and we will go through the questions. So for those of you here, we'll start here. If anybody has any questions for the three panelists, please raise your hand and then introduce yourself and where you're from, or your affiliation if you have one, and ask your question. Yes, please.
The question is the following one. We had recently the possibility to talk to somebody who follows quite closely the efforts undertaken to reach a kind of peace agreement. And the thesis was, if I understood her correctly, that they are very close, that they more or less they agreed upon the text, but for certain reasons Azerbaijan is not able at the moment and willing to give his, how to say, green light to sign it. And then I insisted again, I said, could you be more precise? Let's say, which are the points which are, and then, okay, let's say, but I said, no, we more or less, the text is more or less agreed upon. And she, you know her probably personally, she assumes quite, what is it, influential responsibility in the external service. But for certain reasons, people want to be quoted.
Could you state your name for us?
Hans-Jochen Schmidt, I worked in the Foreign Office, and I was for some time ambassador in Armenia.
Thank you very much. Is your question directed to anyone in particular, or?
Just let's say, how would you judge? Let's say it is the efforts undertaken by, and if there is a hope that in the, how do you say, not too distant future, there may be a kind of agreement to sign it.
Would any of our?
And then, I'm sorry, and then maybe to add, this person is fully aware of the fact that Azerbaijan is, for example, not very much interested in helping, this project, for example, that would be a confidence building measure, for example, to open the frontier towards Turkey, for example.
Thank you very much.
What is it, how do you call this? This cross-country infrastructure program, it's an initiative undertaken and so on.
Would any of our panelists be comfortable fielding that question?
Well, I can say what my impression is that indeed probably the sides are closer to signing an agreement that they've ever been before, which still doesn't mean that they're close enough. But things are happening, and tomorrow I think there might be a meeting in Budapest, or maybe not. But there are still some issues. There is the issue of Azerbaijan has mentioned a few times that Armenia has to change its constitution because in their view, there's a reference to Nagorno-Karabakh as part of Armenia, which there's been recently a decision by the Constitutional Court of Armenia about the delimitation agreement, which basically says that this is not the case. So it will be really very difficult to organize a referendum, especially if it is perceived as a result of pressure from Azerbaijan, but Armenia is trying to solve this issue through another way. It still remains to be seen whether that will be enough for Azerbaijan or not. But I think the real reason is Russian position. Again, maybe my friends from Azerbaijan won't agree with that, maybe they will, but at least since August, since Vladimir Putin's visit to Baku, there's been a whole series of Russian officials basically saying that, there has to be a link between, I'm sure you've heard about this idea of the link between Nakhichevan and the rest of Azerbaijan. And this has to be controlled by Russians, which is unacceptable for Armenia. So Armenia is ready to provide the link, but it cannot be controlled by Russians. So that's where the sides have a difficulty arriving to. So I'm sure without the Russian pressure, there would have been an agreement about that. But there is the Russian pressure. And maybe one of the ways of dealing with that would be to not sign a comprehensive agreement, but sign a declaration about the principles. So this has also been discussed. I don't know, but maybe also you have more recent information.
I think, pretty much agree, but there are two approaches. I mean, there are many, but the one is that you either go fully in details and assign a full comprehensive peace treaty agreement, which has become a rather ambivalent thing because there are two large topics that have been sidelined by the parties. One concerns connectivity. I think how to, technically speaking, open up all the communications line in a way that it also kind of satisfies both parties. The party agreed not to touch upon details of it during the peace treaty. The second is the borders. So
Connectivity, you mean, I'm sorry, like Zangezur, for example.
This and also largely speaking, whole Armenia, Azerbaijan, this and that. And the second is borders, as in how to find a solution to all border issues, which also got a bit sidelined because it is really impossible to have one answer and one recipe for all border issues because it is really lengthy period. As a matter of fact, for example, Azerbaijani-Georgian border have not been demarcated like for 30 years. So this is another set of the problems. They got sidelined. Now the peace treaty is more about very ambivalent understanding of the concepts. And there exists another approach, tactically speaking, is that instead of signing a peace treaty, let's sign agreed principles of peace treaty and leave non-agreed aside, which also has become a problem. And then there is another approach of saying, okay, let's discuss a peace treaty in parallel of signing very kind of few principles of interstate communication, such as recognizing character integrity, the human relations, and so on and so forth, which would be baseline level. I don't really have a clear answer to that riddle, as in why either one is not happening as of today. Perhaps reasons that I'm not aware of, or I could only guess, but my guessing would not be helpful at this point. So this is the process that is happening. Also, there's another process happening on the borders, steadily, step by step, but happening. So kind of we have kind of not stuck at the same point. Not sure if Leila has any other things to add.
Well, we have one question from online and two questions from the audience. So we'll take the online question first.
We have actually many questions online, but I will just read 3 questions and panelists will choose which to answer.
Okay.
So I will start with Edward Grigorian. He's asking, hello, I'm Edward from Armenia. My question is whether after COP29, there will be any chance to sign peace agreement? This is the first question. And the second question is, it's Christina Pedrini, given the profound trauma resulting from prolonged conflict and instability experienced by both communities, do you think mental health and psychosocial support should be part of confidence-building programming in the region? And the last question we can take from online is, could you please elaborate about the role of social media in building social cohesion? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So the first question, just to repeat, because I know it's a bit difficult to hear over in that corner, will there be a peace agreement signed after the COP29? The second is about the need for mental health and psychosocial support initiatives for communities affected by conflict. And the third is about social media. So I'm not sure who would like to handle which of those questions. I'll leave it up to you.
Maybe we could each say a couple of words about each question, but try to keep it short.
Yeah.
At least I will try to keep it short. So about the first question, I don't really know because COP29 is more related to Azerbaijan. So maybe my colleagues from Azerbaijan can say, but there was basically the understanding of that was if it is signed, it will probably be signed before COP29. And after COP29, there's no rush any longer. So it can at least maybe until January 20, when there's a new president in US, or maybe even longer. So yes, once COP29 is passed, then we don't really know how much it will take. About mental health, absolutely, I think that's a huge issue, and you can actually feel it in the air when you go, from Armenia to a country like Germany. You can feel how visibly calm people they are here. So because it's not, so of course there's the communities which are directly affected, which is first of all Armenians of Nagorno-Karabakh who are now refugees. And there are communities like that also in Azerbaijan, but also the whole society, like living in the fear that tomorrow there may be a war. It really affects mental health of everybody. So I think that it's a very big issue and we have to deal with it. And about social media, it's related to the mental health. I think they are, unfortunately, this mental health problems, they are very much influencing the social media, and social media is influencing the mental health situation. And I think that's one of the fields where you can do a lot of work, because at least in Armenia, I'm not sure what the situation in Azerbaijan is, but basically in Armenia now, if you have a good YouTube channel, for example, you can get hundreds of thousands of views if you are able to express yourself well. So maybe a good project would be to find somebody, a social media persona who is able and wants to advance this agenda and to work with them. Because there are influencers who are really very influential. Sorry for this wording.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm going to turn to our panelist online for her responses to any of these 3 questions.
Thank you so much. Well, first of all, I would like to answer the question about media. There is definitely a controversial sort of perception of social media, because there is, of course, an easy place for hate speech, for fake news on the one hand, but on the other hand, we witness that the social media give voices to the people with alternative, mainly peace perspectives. During the war, after the wars, and during the sort of dramatic periods of the history of this conflict. So this empowerment, social media plays the role of empowerment of even lone voices, not only the groups, but even the lone voices, which may have quite a substantial influence on the, processes in the society. And I think the official level, track one, they do react to the processes in the social media. So as you probably notice, I'm trying to take the positive and the optimistic view. So I do believe that social media does have a positive potential to contribute to the peace initiatives. And as I said, I already had that experience myself. The conflict, the peace agreement definitely will boost the positive image of the country or of the leader who did it. You can imagine that he will write in his name in the history as someone who put an end to this conflict. The other thing is that they're undergoing a multi-level issue. Because, one of the arguments the government on the Azerbaijani side brings that, where is the guarantee that we will not be attacked again or have another 30 years of occupation, things like that, which definitely finds understanding at the societal level. So there are various narratives which are used, and very often they have a real grounds to sort of bring in some demands or conditions to prolong this process. But I also think that deep inside, as I mentioned in the beginning, that this is a very big political capital for the leader who will sign the peace agreement in whichever form, whether peace framework, conditional framework, or any other. I think they will try to do something time for the COP29, whether before, during, or after, doesn't matter. But I hope there will be some achievement and progress in this regard. And of course, the trauma can be healed through the health issue, and mental health, as we know, is now one of the top issues in the international organizations, in the NGOs, international NGOs, practically all the young, particularly youth movements, they do include this issue. And the concept, one of the concepts, why is it so important? It's that they are getting empowered by the social platforms on the one hand, but in reality, they don't get enough power. So this contradiction also aggravates the condition, the mental and health condition of the youth. So it's a very general problem. So I think inevitably will also be conducted in the cases of conflict. So I think it's also quite actual. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shuja, do you have any comments on this?
Pretty much agree, but only is really, I'm also in favor of, again, glorifying it is good. It's really needed for conflict management perspective. I pretty much agree with Leila, Mikhail, and Phil. But also, I'm also against of sacralizing it. When it is kind of recipe that lingers in the air that will come at one point and that will solve all problems. I think that is also not the case. So peace agreement is needed, but it is not the one that will bring all the answers that is needed. I mean, there are many examples of a peace treaties that got signed and that got kind of not implemented, not abided. India, Pakistan signed in 1971 a similar peace agreement, pretty much with like 20, 30 points. They went to the war 20 years after Israel, Palestinian, Oslo Accords it did not even become accurate after moment after it got signed. So I think it's also about the other things. But when it will be signed, I mean, when it will be signed, to be honest, when do you agree? Yeah, I'm mostly against of putting a deadlines there because we always fail in just predicting those deadlines.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to our two questions in the room, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Walter Kaufmann from the Heinrich Böll Foundation. Very interesting to listen to your very good discussion. I got somehow the impression when you were reflecting on liberal peacemaking versus illiberal peacemaking that looking back at the 90s and 2000s, one gets the impression, well, liberal peacemaking failed, while illiberal peacemaking is succeeding now somehow. So was it because the concept of liberal peace is not applicable to the region, not applicable to this conflict? What was wrong in it, and what is? Do we need some kind of? It's relevant also for the Middle East conflicts. And so, do we need some? Well, in the end, be honest, kind of, we need some kind of illiberal steps first, and then we can manage borders and manage. So resolve the Karabakh issue somehow. Yeah? This is what I sometimes can even hear from Western diplomats. Yeah, this thing needed to be solved. Yeah, it's caused traumata. It's not nice. It's violent, but now it's kind of over, and we can start peacemaking again. So how do you relate to this reflection on liberal versus illiberal peacemaking? And to Shujat and maybe Laila, the question, in Azerbaijan, under the current political conditions, is engaging with Armenians, discussing peace with Armenians, has it become less dangerous than it used to be? Or what's the situation today?
Thank you for your questions. And the second question.
Yeah, my question is quite similar actually, which might not be so surprising. So my name is Sonja Schiffers. I'm the director of the Heinrich Böll Foundation Tbilisi office for Caucasus region. And I wanted to ask two interrelated questions. The first one on, you already mentioned, Laila talked about leaders who make peace, getting some recognition for it, and that this could be an interest also of the leaders. But many have also argued that Aliyev, particularly, and my questions are about Azerbaijan, because this is still more of a black box. What is the situation in Armenia? So many have argued also that Aliyev actually does not have a genuine interest in peace, and that basically he gains from this anti-Armenian narrative, which is still often promoted in the government and public discourse. So do you think there is a genuine interest in peace, also in light of the delays of the peace agreement signing, or is it other problems that explain the delays? You have partially touched upon it, but I still wanted to ask it more specifically. And in relation to that, and it also links to Walter's second question, you mentioned several measures that should be taken probably in the medium to long term, but educational changes, rethinking the national narratives, intra-societal peace building. Who could do this in Azerbaijan right now? Is there anyone, or could it be a state effort? Yeah.
Thank you very much for those questions. I'll turn first to you, Dr. Laila, because I think there were a number of questions directed to you. Please. Did you hear them? Were you able to understand the questions?
Well, I would like to answer the question about liberal, illiberal peace. Definitely, we witnessed that, and not only at the regional level and, the broader context. I think that the violence was there from the very beginning. So the problem is not in illiberal or liberal peace. It's about the, as I already said, non-discrimination of the groups in regards their rights and their sort of freedoms. in depending on their ethnic or religious background. I think it's not even from Azerbaijani side, it's not even the issue of territory so much, if you ask me. I would think that it's about the sense of being neglected as human beings, as minorities, as people who suffered the what is called now ethnic cleansing and everything. So although both sides suffered these issues, but I think there is a deep, deep sense of inequality from the side of Azerbaijani society in terms of the redress or even attention to their rights as compared to the others. So I think this is the key issue, not the idea of the liberal or illiberal peace. So I think in every conflict, one should be very cautious and very attentive, whether the rights of one group is being established or promoted at the expense of the others. So I think it's similar in the other parts of the world. You can see it also happening. So that's my perception of what's in fact going, or what's the underlying problem. So it's not about liberal or illiberal peace, but it's about the equality and non-discrimination of various groups in regards their background, according to their background or their ethnic or religious identity. That's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. Shija, did you also want to respond to that as well?
Yeah, I mean, what is the liberal peace? So liberal peace means essentially expansion of Western way of peacemaking. That is, when you have a liberal democracy, when you have, let's say, European integration, as well as free trade, all in all, acts in a cohesion that brings a liberal peace. I think liberal peace went through multiple crises, which in the end resulted in paraphrase of, let's say, enhanced Europe, including Azerbaijan and Armenia, rejecting this. The first is usually liberal peace, I mean, whatever type of peace is there, this hegemonic understanding of peace goes in hand with order of international politics. And here, expansion of liberal peace, which is a phenomenon of the 90s, that kind of got promoted as a recipe for ethno-territorial conflicts in the Balkans and the Caucasus, went in hand with expanding unilateral international order, not unilateral, what do you call it? This hegemonic US-led Western order, which went through the crisis of war on terror after 9/11. I think that 9/11 was a turning point in the sense that after that, the retreat of neoliberal expansion got accelerated. With that happening, we had neoliberal expansionism getting more and more rejected by non-Western actors, including Armenia and Azerbaijan, if you look at them in non-European space. That is the first, I think, the crisis. So you have the one hegemonic international relation system built after the end of the Soviet Union. You have the vision, you have the model that is promoted. It works at some places, like in Bosnia, it doesn't work in other places. Then you have a crisis in 2001 with the war on terror, and the crisis deepens as non-Western actors rise, China and Russia. So you have the other vision, and most reject this neoliberal expansionism. So they don't want to go for that road. The second question was whether engaging with Armenians became less dangerous, right? That was a question. I think overall answer would be yes. Yes, because for a very simple reason, because roles got reversed. Up until 2020, Azerbaijan was defeated. I mean, I don't want to put them in the cliche understandings, but Azerbaijan was defeated party, Armenia was the victor. Peace was less problematic for the victor, so you had more kind of repulsive peace buildings happening in Armenia. Roles got reversed. Now there is no problem. Problem got solved militarily. It's easier to talk about peace. So that's why societal pressure got eliminated from the shoulders of the peace builders. Once they were traitors, now they're not. I mean, not all of course, were regarded as traitors for sure, but there was a societal pressure and then. So overall, yes, it became less dangerous. In terms of anyone that is willing to, anyone that could do this type of work in Azerbaijan, given the older situation, I think it is not about a particular person. I think it's about, I mean, it could sometimes even a state-led thing. For example, on the borders, I don't imagine really grassroots investor in the really liberal sense of the word grassroots activism happening for border making, because it doesn't really make sense. The borders have to be constructed by states on a very high level. So I think perhaps on this hand, state intervention is not something bad. It actually could create a space for having intersocietal dialogue. On other areas, it very much depends on the context actually. So yeah.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those insights. We are coming to the end of our event. Izat, if there's one more question from online or one more question from the audience that we could take, please.
Yeah, I'm Andi Vlasoli. I'm from Kosovo, Pristina. I'm exchange student here in Germany. So my question would be like the role of EU in the negotiation procedure. For example, in our context, the EU has really influence. Both it can be like positive and negative. It can foster like social cohesion, yet it may cause sometimes huge mistrust of local societies towards like EU institutions. So I would like to know more about the context of Armenia and Azerbaijan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. Would you like to take it?
So in our context, the EU got, I mean, it was somewhere around, but until the war of 2020, it was considered that the OSCE is handling this issue, so EU was not too much interfering with that. But then after the war of 2020, sort of Russia became the main mediator or whatever you could call this role. And since late 2021, EU became more active. And from Armenian point of view, it has been very useful, especially there's this EU monitoring mission, which is situated on the border of Armenia and Azerbaijan. And that was also suggested to Azerbaijan, but Azerbaijan refused. And since then, this EU monitoring mission has been criticized very strongly in Azerbaijan and also in Russia. But for Armenia, it remains a very important aspect of ensuring that there's no further violence. And in general, since 2022, especially since September 2022, Armenia-EU contacts have become much more active. And today, Armenia is talking about diversification of its foreign policy because it used to be very much reliant on Russia. Now this dependence is being reduced, and EU, of course, is #1 partner for Armenia. But of course, this kind of Armenia-EU rapprochement, it means that EU is no longer accepted to the same extent as a mediator in Azerbaijan, but about that maybe my colleagues will talk more.
Leila or Shushat, would you like to add to that? You're on mute.
Yeah. Well, definitely EU was a weak actor as a mediator. We know that was OSCE, but because all the attempts of mediation failed, I think again there was a serious grounds for the leadership to move away from the mediation from the EU. It coincided also with the lack of interest in integration, which had domestic roots, effect of the oil money on the domestic institutions, resistance to reform and things like that. But gradually, I think EU and transatlantic community became less what is called in psychology a referent group, a group of reference, which means that Azerbaijani political elites or ruling elites are do less care about their perception, their image, and their relations with the West as it used to be before. And as I said, it's not just perception of the weakness of the West as a whole, which is actually developing before our eyes, but it's also the result, as I said, because of the perceived discrimination in the conflict and how they treated both nations. And so it's to a certain degree, it finds the response in the society. But I think that what actually mentioned before, and I forgot to answer that question, that utilization of the military rhetoric and the conflict rhetoric might already is exhausting itself, because there is more rhetoric and official sort of statements and actions regarding the rehabilitation of the lands which were under occupation and now they are liberated. So it's more about the constructive sort of construction and investment in this region rather than, continuous military rhetoric. I think it's partly a result of the feedback which the government was getting internationally. So I think that's sort of playing its role. And yeah, so that's basically what I wanted to tell. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Coming back to the main title of our event, building confidence and fostering social dialogue. I'd like to give each of our panelists just 1 minute to say any final words that they would like to say on this topic before we wrap up, and hopefully everybody here will share a glass of wine with us outside. So let me begin with Shujat. Any final words?
This is the hardest part. Wrap up in 1 minute.
Yes. I'll cut you.
This conflict has stolen human lives, so this is a reality on both ends. In terms of the numbers, more than 1 million displacement, which is a huge number for countries like Azerbaijan, small enough in terms of demographics and size, and Armenia. More than 30,000 people got killed, and many more wounded and many more traumatized, I guess millions. So of course, this is the long way to go and to heal the old traumas, if to speak in these terms, and it requires a lot of things. Perhaps at this point, it's more of like it's more valuable to pursue internal rethinking more, with the goal of this contributing largely a wider Armenian and Azerbaijani, as well as Armenian-Turkish reconciliation.
Thank you very much for that. Leila. Any last words? You have 1 minute if you want to say anything that you would like us and our audience to take away from this evening.
I would like to say that, as I said, there are some advantages of the current situation. First of all, it allows the countries in the region take their own fate in their hands, to maybe create local regional mechanisms. I don't include the external bigger powers, just 3. I mean, it's an old idea of the Caucasus sort of unity, but I think there might be some better grounds for this and better awareness that maybe creating our own regional court, criminal court would be a good idea. Regional mechanisms of conflict resolution, regional vision. And the vision is that you can't compete endlessly for the pieces of land, right? You need to also, because there are some finite resources in this regard. So you need to learn how to share how to cooperate, how coexist, because it leads to the added value. So it's, as I said, we need to start to appreciate each other. And as it was in before, Armenians were enriching Azerbaijani society, and Azerbaijanis were enriching, respectfully, Armenian society. That's what the leaders, intellectual leaders, civil society leaders should sort of bring to the public the ideas, and they should take the process in their hands. That's basically it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Mikael, you have the last word.
Well, I think my colleagues already said quite a lot. I would like to add that now we have a period when a real breakthrough is possible, which has not been the case for many years. And this period may not last long. So now we have a combination of the internal and external situation in which this breakthrough is possible. Even tomorrow, maybe the greater power dynamic changes and there's a new conflict somewhere in the region, and this chance is gone. So I think both Armenians and Azerbaijanis and all those who have a stake in this, whether it's EU, whether it's NGOs, international donors, we really need to focus on this moment and do as much as we can to really grab this opportunity.
Thank you very much. Excellent last words. I want to thank you all for coming tonight to be with us, and for everybody online. Thank you for joining us. A special thanks to Zeus for the co-organization and the initiation of this event. Thank you very much, and to the Berkhof team behind the scenes for making all this happen. And of course, to our distinguished panelists, it was a pleasure, and going forward. Thank you.